And you are live, sir.
Okay, start.
1 minute, sir. 1 minute.
Yeah.
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all of you for the Satsang on Sunday. We will have Mr. David Godman with us. And we will start the proceedings of the day with chanting and Updesh and subsequently Mr. David Godman will be joining us. Narayananji?
Okay, sir. Shivaya Namah, Anandaya Namah, Govindaya Namah. Shuklam Bharadaram Vishnum Shashivannam Chadurvujam Prasannavadhanam Dhyaye Sarvabhinopashantye. Ayam Murta Samusargo Tudivando, Mandono Kranando, Ayam Murta Samusargostu, Adeva Naganam Sadinam Sadeva, Taramanam Chandravalam Sadeva, Vidyavalam Divavalam Sadeva, Lakshmipati, Yudam, Marami, Om Bo, Om Bua, Om Suvat, Om Maha, Om Jana, Om Tava, Om Satyam, Om Tatsavadharvadiyam, Parikudevasya Dhimi, Diyo Yona Prajodayat, Om Ava Jyotirisa Amudam Brahma Purvasram, Mamopata, Samasta, Buddha, Shatwara, Parmeswara, Vidyakam, Krishyamanisha Karmana, Nirvignana Prasamya Tattam, Ado Vigneswara Budam Karishye, Vidya Nil Turusurusi, Udalam Tantavamo Devada, Vidya Trada, Loga Devacham, Visnuda Truda, Tvarchataremam, Devi Pavitram Guru Sasanam, Agamartam tu Devanam, Kamanartam tu Rakshasam, Kandaravam Karamyadav, Devadavana, Janam. Mamopata, Samasta, Buddha, Shatwara, Sri Parmeswara, Vidyakam, Nirvita Siddhartam Ado, Vigneswara Pujam Karshye, Gananam Tva Ganapatikum Avame, Kavin Kavina, Pumastotramam, Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspade, Anusumantu Sida Sadram, Asmin Dharitradumbe, Mahaganapati Jaya, Mahaganapati Avamayami. महागणपतिये नमः आसनं समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः अर्घ्यं समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः पाद्यं समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः आसमनीयं समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः औपचारिकस्नानं समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः स्नानानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः वस्त्रदानं अक्षतां समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः यज्ञोपवीतार्थम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः गन्धां धारयामि समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः गन्धोपरि अक्षतां समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः अलङ्करणार्थम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः हरिद्रा कुंकुमं समर्पयामि महागणपतिये नमः पुष्पै पूजयामि ओम सुमुखाय नमः ओम एकदंताय नमः ओम कपिलाय नमः ओम गजकर्णकाय नमः ओम लंबोदराय नमः ओम विकटाय नमः ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः ओम विनायकाय नमः ओम धूमकेतवे नमः ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः ओम बालचंद्राय नमः ओम गजाननाय नमः ओम वक्रतुंडाय नमः ओम सूर्याय नमः ओम हिरण्मयाय नमः ओम स्कंदपूर्जवाय नमः ओम सिद्धविनायकरे नमः ओम संकटमोक्ष विनायकरे नमः ओम आतुपुरपरे विनायकरे नमः ओम महागणपतिये नमः। नानाविध परिमल पत्र पुष्पाणि समर्पयामि। धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। दीपार्थं समर्पयामि। अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम भूर्भुवस्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवी सविता प्रसूता सत्यं दौर्जेन प्रसन्नामि। ओम स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा ओम अपानाय स्वाहा ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा ओम उदानाय स्वाहा ओम समानाय स्वाहा ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। उरगंड कदलीफल नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि। मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि। अमृतोक्तमुद्रावसं समर्पयामि। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। गणपतिगुं अवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पदां विष्णुमुखीसादनं। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। नीराजनं समर्पयामि। नीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि। प्राणे स्वाहा अपाने स्वाहा ज्ञाने स्वाहा उदाने स्वाहा समाने स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणपति प्रसादं शिरसा प्रणमामि। ओम भो ओम भुव ओम सुव ओम महत् ओम धन ओम तव ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। उमावज्योतिषामृतं कुर्मः सर्वम्। ममोपात समस्त दुर्दस्य द्वारा श्री परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम शुभे शोभने मुहूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीय प्रार्थे श्रीवेदे वराह कल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वंतरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे पादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे नेरो दक्षिणे पार्श्वे शताब्दे अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावाधिके प्रभवादिनां षष्ट्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये रमणनाम संवत्सरे उत्तरायणे शिशिर ऋतु मीन मासे शुक्ल बच्चे चतुर्थ्या शुभतिथौ भानुवासर युक्तायां आरुद्रा नक्षत्र युक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभ योग शुभ कर्म देवन गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायां अस्यां चतुर्थ्यां शुभतिथौ मम जन्म पापस जन्म प्रति एतच्चन पर्यन्तं मध्ये संभाविदानं सर्वेषां भावानां सत्य अवनोदनार्थम् अस्माहं सहकुर्मानं क्षेमसत्तर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्यणाम् अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्त मंगलावर्थ्यर्थं समस्त दुर्दोषशान्त्यर्थं रमण महर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञान वैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं रमण महर्षि पूजां करिष्ये। तदन्तं कलश पूजां च करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि। सोमनाथे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च। कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठे रुद्र समाधि च मूले तत्र सिद्धो ब्रह्मा मातुये मातृगुणा संयुता कुशौ तु सागरा सर्वे सप्तत्रिभुजा वसुंधरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदो पदर्वण गंगे से सैन्य सही गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंधु कावेरी जलेस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु अंगै च दैता सर्वे कलसाम्ब समाचिता अयांतु देव पूजार्थम दुर्दस्य कारकः। त्वं बोरा सागरोत्पन्नो विष्णुना विष्णु करे देवे से बुझे बुझे सारो से समोस्तुते देवो देवालय प्रप्तो जीव देव स्नानन अंजान निर्मालयम सोयांदो ने बुधे। ओम सकल गुणात्म शक्तियुक्ता योग पीडात्मने नमः। आधार शक्तिये नमः। मूल प्रकृतिये नमः। आदिवराय नमः। आदिकूर्माय नमः। अनंताय नमः। पृथ्वीये नमः। आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः। दश दिक्पालेभ्यो नमः। गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम अस्य श्री प्राण प्रतिष्ठा मंत्रस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिर्कित स्वामधर्माणि संधांसि सकल जति सृष्टि अमगण अवयवता प्राण शक्ति प्रादेवता आम शक्ति हरि शक्ति ओम बीजम प्राण प्रतिष्ठा विनियोग। ओम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः। ओम तर्जनीभ्यां नमः। ओम अनिष्टिकाभ्यां नमः। ओम करतलपुष्टाभ्यां नमः। आम हृदयाय नमः। हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा। ओम शिगाय वशं। आम कौसाय हरिं नेत्रदाय वशं। ओम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्वस्वरूप दिग्बंध ध्यानं लग्नांबोधिष्ठ बोधोरस तरुण सुरकराब्चे आसं गोदंड विष्णु मणिगुणम पंचमानां विप्राणस्य कवालं त्रिनरसिताप्तिनवसो रोट्या देवी बाला गौरना बहुसूरी प्राण शक्ति परान। ओम आम हरिं क्रोम ओम हरिं माम अम्यम रमणम वंशम सम्म अंश सोहम सोहम अंश अस्यां मूर्तौ जीवतिष्ठतु अस्यां मूर्तौ सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वांग मनस्व सस्सोत्र जीव्या प्राणवा पाणिपाद आयुगुस्तानि या कस्ते स्वस्ति सुखम सुरम स्वाहा। ओम अस्य श्री प्राण प्रतिष्ठा मंत्रस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिर्किजिसामधर्माणि संधांसि सकल जगत् स्थितिदि सम्मार्गाणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति ओम कीलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः। हरिं तर्जनीभ्यां नमः। ओम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः। आम अनादिभ्यां नमः। हरिं कनिष्ठाभ्यां नमः। ओम करतलपुष्टाभ्यां नमः। आम हृदयाय नमः। हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा। ओम शिगाय वसन्। आम कौसायं हरिं नेत्रदाय यमशं। ओम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्वस्वरूप दिग्बंध असुनीदे पुनर्स्माक्ष सत्स पुनः प्राणमीनो देवगम जो पश्यन्य सूर्य उच्चन्न मनमदे मयान प्रति आवाहितो भव श्रद्धायुतो भव सन्निहितो भव सन्निहितो भव अपगुण्डितो भव सुप्रदो भव सुप्रसन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामी सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावत् ध्रुवं प्रतिभावेन केन्द्रेऽस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुचेलाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुचेलाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुचेलाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः। चतुर्नोति मंत्रन पौरसे पत्रपः लक्ष्मी प्रद सीमान प्रद प्रिय ईश्वरा। I will recite Ramnostotram now. All of you can join me. श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। अपार सच्चि सुगुवारि राशोर्य शोर्मि मात्रं भुवनं कमस्तं वाजितं तं ब्रह्मं कबीरं चिन्ताविनीनं कीर्ति चिन्तयामि। ओम महोसेन जाताय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम गुरवे नमः। ओम अखंड संविदाकराय नमः। ओम महोजसे नमः। ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः। ओम जगद्विदावताराय नमः। ओम श्री भूमिनादास्तलोतिलाय नमः। ओम पराशर कुलोतंसाय नमः। ओम सुंदरात्मवद्बलाय नमः। ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः। ओम सयायापासयायवते नमः। ओम शोणातुल महोदीन मानसा नमः। ओम स्वर्णस्तगाय नमः। ओम श्रीमद्वादशांग महास्त्रे लब्ध विद्योदिताय नमः। ओम महाशक्ति निवादेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः। ओम परमार्थविदे नमः। ओम दिव्यराय नमः। ओम पितृपदान्वेषिणे नमः। ओम इंदुमौलिना पितृपदे नमः। ओम विदुरादेश सोणशैल प्राप्ताय नमः। ओम तपोमयाय नमः। ओम उदासीनाय नमः। ओम महायोगिने नमः। ओम महोत्साय नमः। ओम कुशाग्रदिये नमः। ओम शांग संकल्प संप्रवाय नमः। ओम सुसुंदुसे नमः। ओम सवित्रे नमः। ओम स्थिराय नमः। ओम तपस्वीद सर्वंगाय नमः। ओम फुल्लांबुज विलोचनाय नमः। ओम चंद्रिका सुदास श्री मंडितानिन मंडलाय नमः। ओम सुबुधवाक्याम समासीनाय नमः। ओम शूर्निदाकिन विप्रमाय नमः। ओम वेद वेदांग तत्तज्ञाय नमः। ओम श्रीपुत्रणे नमः। ओम त्रिगुणाधिगाय नमः। ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः। ओम विराजनसलाकृतये नमः। ओम मुक्तिनयनाय नमः। ओम पूर्णाय नमः। ओम रसिदासनतांडवाय नमः। ओम गंभीराय नमः। ओम परमाचार्याय नमः। ओम सुप्रसन्नाय नमः। ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः। ओम दक्षिणासीनाय नमः। ओम धीराय नमः। ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः। ओम स्वराजे नमः। ओम महर्षिये नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम ईत्याय नमः। ओम भूम विद्या विशारदाय नमः। ओम विमलाय नमः। ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः। ओम आप्ताय नमः। ओम रुजमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः। ओम समत्सुसे नमः। ओम सत्यत्रुसे नमः। ओम सत्याय नमः। ओम प्रशांताय नमः। ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः। ओम सुकुमाराय नमः। ओम सदानंदाय नमः। ओम मृदुभाषिणे नमः। ओम दयार्णवाय नमः। ओम श्री सोणासुर इरुद्भूत स्कंदाश्रम निकेतनाय नमः। ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टरे नमः। ओम सद्भक्त वृंद परिवृताय नमः। ओम गणेश मुनिभृंगेन सेविता त्रिसरोरुवाय नमः। ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि ग्रंथ सिद्ध संशयाय नमः। ओम वर्णासम्मदादीदाय नमः। ओम रसज्ञाय नमः। ओम सौम्याय नमः। ओम आत्मवदे नमः। ओम सर्वावनिमतस्थानामाराध्याय नमः। ओम सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः। ओम आत्मारामाय नमः। ओम महाभागाय नमः। ओम मातृमुक्तिविदायकाय नमः। ओम विनदाय नमः। ओम विनुदाय नमः। ओम विप्राय नमः। ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ओम भावगोज्ज्वलाय नमः। ओम दर्शनागम सम्मार्गे नमः। ओम मौनेन स्वात्म बोधकाय नमः। ओम निर्चान्दिकर्षानित्याय नमः। ओम सुमृणाद्बन्ध मोचकाय नमः। ओम अन्तस्मीन झण्डाप्सवे नमः। ओम संसारानुबन्धारकाय नमः। ओम सोणां श्री आदित्युष्टरे नमः। ओम आर्त विद्या प्रकाशकाय नमः। ओम अविच्युत निज प्रज्ञाय नमः। ओम नैसर्गिक महातपसे नमः। ओम कमंडलुधराय नमः। ओम सुप्रगोगी नवसनाय नमः। ओम गुवाय नमः। ओम दंडवाणिये नमः। ओम कृपा पूर्णाय नमः। ओम पवरोग पिशंपराय नमः। ओम स्कंदाय नमः। ओम देवतमाय नमः, ओम अमर्त्याय नमः, ओम सेनान्ये नमः, ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। हरि ओम, हरि ओम, हरि ओम, हरि ओम, हरि ओम, हरि ओम। Let us all recite Bhagavan's Upadesha Saram. कर्तुराज्ञया प्राप्यते फलम् कर्म किं परम् कर्म तज्जडम् प्रीतिमागतो पदनकारणम् फलम् शाश्वतम् गतिनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितम् निश्चया कृतम् चित्तशोधकम् मुक्तिसाधकम् कायवाङ्मन कार्यमुत्तमम् पूजनं जप चिन्तनं क्रमा जगदीशदी युक्तसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभिः देवपूजनम् उच्चमस्तवा दुर्जमन्दक सिद्धजं जप ज्ञानमुत्तमम् आज्ञधारया मोदशासमम् सरलचिन्तनम् विरलतरम् वेदभावना सौम्यसो भावनाभिधा भावनीमदा भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावनामला भक्तिरुद्धमा इरुष्टले मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्ति योग बोधाश निश्चितम् वायुरोदना दीयते मन जालभक्षिव रोध साधनम् सिद्धवायव सिद्क्रियायुधा सागयोद्वयी शक्तिमूलका लय विनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदं पुनः भवति नो कृतम् प्राणबन्धना दीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नाशमेत्यग नष्टमानसो पृष्ठयोगिन कृत्यमस्त्रिजिम् स्वस्तितं यत दृश्यवारिदम् चित्तमात्मन चित्तदर्शनम् तत्त्वदर्शनम् मानसं तुदिं मार्गणे कृते नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवा वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन ममयं कुतो भवति चिन्वद ऐपदत्यं निजविसारणम् अहमिनाशवा यमहं दया स्फुरति स्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं पदा अभिज्ञमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अभ्यल्लसत्तया विग्रहेन्द्रिय प्राणदीतम नामसे कस गज्जडं सस सत्त्ववासिका चित्त्ववेदरा सद्गयायिषि सिद्धयायहम् ईशजीवयो वेशदीपिता सत्स्वभावतो वस्तु केवलम् वेशानद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनम् स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भया आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनचि ज्ञानमस्ति ज्ञातुमन्तरम् किं स्वरूपमि आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा पूर्णसिद्धम् बन्धमुक्त्यदि तं परं सुखम् विन्दधीयै वस्तुदैविक अहमवेदकम् निजविमानकम् महति तं तवो रमणवागीयम् महति तं तवो रमणवागीयम् महति तं तवो रमणवागीयम्। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। 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 हरि ओम 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 हरि ओम।
Naranji, thank you. A very warm welcome to all of you for the Sunday Q&A with Mr. David Godman, who had last addressed us in November of 2020. Though Mr. Godman needs no introduction, for the benefit of new devotees, a brief background. Mr. Godman has been associated with Raman Ashram and has spent most of the last 40 years in the ashram practicing Bhagwan's teachings and writing about him, his teachings, and his devotees. He is a former editor of The Mountain Path and has edited Be As You Are, one of the most widely read presentations of Sri Raman's teachings. He is also a regular contributor to Kendra's journal, Direct Path. Sir, a very warm welcome to you, and may I please request you to refer to the list of questions shared earlier. Mr. David Godman.
Can you hear me? Is everything unmuted?
Yes, sir. We can hear you very well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. My apologies if my previous presentation suffered a little bit through the quality of the internet. I watched it later and I realized I should have got a better facility, but now I'm in my own home and I hope things will go a little bit better. So I received a list of questions for my last talk and I didn't manage to get through more than a small number of them. So I will continue with the ones that interest me or the ones which are somehow linked to each other, and we'll see how far we get. The first one is, what form of sadhana is recommended for householders? Is Bhagavan's marg, his path of self-inquiry, applicable for everyone? Here's a good one to start with. I think, as everybody here knows, there is a tradition that being a householder is somehow, spiritually at least, a lesser path, and that those who take enlightenment seriously should give up their responsibilities and meditate full time. I don't think I need to tell anyone here that Bhagavan absolutely rejected that view. He didn't regard complete renunciation as necessary, and he generally refused permission to anybody who asked him to take sannyas. He always said no, and he always said no to people who wanted to give up their worldly responsibilities in favor of a lifetime of full-time meditation. A few weeks ago, I'm in Australia at the moment, I went to a Buddhist monastery an hour or so from here, and one of the monks was taking questions from visitors, and one of the questions was, is it necessary for me to become a monk in order to get enlightened? And I was slightly surprised when he said probably yes. So that there are traditions in the world in which it is somehow deemed necessary that you adopt a renunciate lifestyle, that you become a monk of some sort. And that creates a division between, how shall we say, those who are fast-tracked, those who are in a position to devote themselves full-time to liberation and may attain it, and a vast body of ordinary householder devotees who are excluded from that tradition. Old school traditional Hinduism did have a similar attitude. It did recognize that there was a progression from householder to vanaprastha to sannyasin. But as I said earlier, Bhagavan never ever said that only those who renounced the world could attain liberation. He didn't even go so far as to say that those who did renounce the world stood a better chance if they did so. As I mentioned earlier, Bhagavan never gave any devotee permission to give up a household life if that particular devotee had responsibilities and duties there. And so far as I'm aware, there isn't a single recorded case of any devotee ever asking Bhagavan for sannyas and Bhagavan granting it to him. I would just throw in a couple of stories because they're quite entertaining. Kanji Swami asked Bhagavan in the early 20s that he could initiate him into sannyas, and Bhagavan refused. Kanji Swami didn't accept that decision as final. He went off to the Himalayas. He found a sannyas guru. He got himself a new robe and a nice new fancy name, which I forget. And he came back to Ramanashram, stood in front of Bhagavan and said, Bhagavan, my new name is Swami, whatever it was, I forget what it was. And Bhagavan laughed and said, so far as I'm concerned, you're always going to be Kanji Swami. And that deflated him. Bhagavan didn't take his formal initiation or his pilgrimage to the Himalayas seriously at all, pretended it had never happened and carried on calling him Kanji Swami. Then there's the case of Sadhu Natanananda. He was another very ardent householder devotee who thought he would be better off taking sannyas. He knew enough about Bhagavan's ways to know that he wasn't going to get a yes from Bhagavan. So as a kind of optimistic intermediate step, he brought his ochre robes, the robes he was planning to wear, into the old hall, and he put them on the offering stool in front of Bhagavan in the hope that having them there for a couple of minutes would be a kind of proxy unofficial blessing on them. Bhagavan said nothing. He wouldn't even look at him. Sadhu Natanananda took up the orange robe, put them on, and went off to be a sannyasin. After some time, he regretted it. He came back to Bhagavan and said, my apologies, I made a mistake. It didn't work out for me. You were right, I was wrong. So that there are many, many cases of people who wanted to take sannyas, people who actually tried it. Each case, Bhagavan refused to be the initiator, and the people who did go off and try it didn't get good results. Apropos getting good results, I will just mention the story that Papaji told me. Papaji incidentally also asked him for sannyas, and Bhagavan of course refused. But in later years, Papaji liked to travel in the Himalayas. He used to take a few months off every year, wander around. And as he wandered around, he encountered thousands of sadhus, swamis in caves and ashrams all over the Himalayas. And he told me, you know, David, I never saw a single person there who had renounced the world, gone off to the Himalayas to meditate, who ever got enlightened. He said, my motto is, show me the results. If on my Himalayan tours I had seen swamis and sadhus who had given up the world, gone to live in their cave and succeeded, I might be recommending that path myself. But since I didn't see a single person to whom that had happened, I can't really recommend it as a path. And then he surprised me a little bit by saying, I travel all over India. I meet with my own devotees. They're all householders. They live in different parts of the country. And in my experience, there are many of the householders living ordinary, everyday lives who are in a better state than all of these swamis in the Himalayas. These swamis somehow, they don't evolve spiritually. They end up spending their time in a survival scramble. They don't really have the time to devote to what they went up there for, and they don't succeed. There's one other story I must throw in here. There's a schoolboy friend of Bhagavan called Rangan, probably quite well known to the devotees. And when he was visiting Bhagavan at Skandashram, he was feeling a bit depressed. He had family problems. He wanted to take sannyas. In his case, it was definitely running away. It wasn't, I don't think he wanted to attain liberation. He just wanted to flee his rather unfortunate family circumstances. So he told Bhagavan, I want to, in this case, Bhagavan didn't, my picture has frozen. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
It just froze 3 seconds ago, so 3 to 5 seconds ago. Otherwise, it was okay.
Has it come back? Because on my screen, I'm still very static.
It is frozen indeed right now.
Let me think, what should I do?
Let me just check the internet connection.
Tell you what,
okay.
I'll just unplug, I'll unplug the camera and put it back in. That normally works. So give me a couple of seconds.
Sure.
Starting the video, the icon.
To start the video.
It is okay now, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's the solution. If it happens again, just call out and I'll just unplug and plug in again.
Thank you. Will do.
So we're back on Rangan. Normally Bhagavan just kept quiet when devotees said, may I take sannyas? They knew he didn't approve, so he didn't feel he had to explain himself again and again. But in the case of Rangan, he went off into Skandashram and came out with a copy of Bhakti Vijayam, which is a famous anthology of the lives of the Marathi saints who lived in Western India a few centuries ago. He opened the book at the story of Vithoba and got to the portion where Vithoba had decided to take sannyas. In that particular story, his son Yanadeva gave him some advice, which I think Bhagavan adopted. And the advice was, wherever you are, whether in worldly society or the forest, the same mind is always with you. It's the same old mind wherever you reside. I think this is something that Bhagavan repeated on many subsequent occasions. He said, you can give up your circumstances, you can change your lifestyle, you can change your location, but wherever you go, you have to take your mind with you. It's the mind that needs to be dealt with. Don't think that your mind is going to change simply by having a change of circumstances and a change of location. And then more pertinently, after Bhagavan had finished telling his story, he told Rangan, you can attain jnana while you're living in samsara, while you're doing your worldly activities. So I think it's quite clear that Bhagavan saw no advantage to physical renunciation. He encouraged devotees to stay with their family, to perform their household obligations. But that was more of a digression, what I've said so far. The original question says, is self-inquiry applicable for everyone, including the householders? Bhagavan sometimes said that self-inquiry is for ripe souls only. There are a few scattered references in ashram books where he makes this comment. Unfortunately, he never ever defined what ripe meant, so we have to make guesses on this. What I can say is there isn't a single instance of Bhagavan ever telling anybody who wanted to do inquiry that they shouldn't do it. And more relevantly, he never ever told anyone that they were not mature enough to do it. So my feeling from going through all the available texts, all the available answers on this, is that if you want to do inquiry, you're ripe enough to do it. So your qualifications, your ripeness comes from a desire to do it, not from any spiritual state you might have or any preliminary sadhanas you might have performed. There's another interesting story that Kunji Swami recorded from the 1920s. Some villagers came to see Bhagavan at Ramanashram, and their spokesperson asked Bhagavan, what's the quickest way to get enlightened? What's the most direct way? And Bhagavan, of course, had to say self-inquiry. When he was asked the question in that way, there's only one possible answer to give, and that answer is do self-inquiry. Ganapati Muni, he wasn't present in the hall on that occasion. He was living on the hill, and somebody reported to him that Bhagavan had given this answer, and he just made the comment, well, if they had come to me, he said, how can they do inquiry? They've got no background, they've had no preparation. If they had come to me, then I would have told them to do japa. So word of Ganapati Muni's response to this came back to Bhagavan, and Bhagavan said, they asked me that question, and the only honest answer was the answer I gave. If somebody asks me what's the quickest way to get enlightened, I'm obliged to say self-inquiry. If I tell them any other answer, if I tell them any other practice, am I not cheating them by giving them wrong information? So even though Bhagavan might have thought that these people couldn't have done it well, he saw no harm in them trying because they had the aspiration. They came to him and said, what is the quickest way to get enlightened? Bhagavan didn't discourage them or tell them to do any other practice. He said, self-inquiry, do self-inquiry, that's the quickest way to attain liberation. One final, for me, concluding and proving comment on this is a section of 3 verses that appear in Upadesha Undiyar, 17, 18, and 19. I will get to 17 after I've just given a summary of what happens in 18 and 19. 18 and 19 just give a little summary of the practice. Bhagavan says, mind is only thought. The I thought is the root of all thoughts, and that mind and I are essentially synonymous. And then he says, when one internally studies in the following way, what is the source, what is the rising place of I, the I will die. This is jnana vichara, this is inquiry into the nature of jnana. So this is a kind of expansion on what self-inquiry is. But in verse 17, he says quite categorically, when one looks intently at the form of the mind without any forgetfulness, it will be discovered that there is no such thing as mind. This is the direct path for all. So this comment, this is the direct path for all, I think is the crucial proving comment for everything I've said up till now. He didn't say it was only for people who are mature. He didn't say it was for ripe people only. For all means everyone, and that includes householders. Next question. I've been following Sage Ramana's teaching for 15 years, but haven't made substantial progress. Is there a need to first clean impurities of mind through bhakti, and only then do self-inquiry as suggested by Sage Ramana? Is bhakti a mandatory preliminary to practice self-inquiry? Well, this raises points that are quite similar to the responses I made to the first question. So I will repeat my conclusion from everything I said there. In my opinion, based on what Bhagavan said to all the people who asked him about this, self-inquiry does not require any preparation. It just requires a desire to do it and a determination to succeed. You are not going to get better at it by practicing other methods because it's a little bit different. Bhagavan said that when you focus on an object, that's called meditation. You can get good at focusing on an object, but if you want to focus on the subject, then you get good at it by focusing on the subject. You don't get good at it by doing other things. Bhagavan, I will qualify this a little bit. Bhagavan did sometimes say that if your mind was not in a quiescent state, you could start your practice by doing some japa or pranayama. He said if your mind was a little bit agitated, these practices would slow it down. But then he'd usually qualify this by saying that the effects of doing the japa, doing the pranayama are only temporary. He would say that you can use them at the beginning, and once you've quietened your mind down a little bit, you can stop doing these preliminary exercises and switch to the full and proper practice of inquiry instead. So I would say, giving an example, you become a good violinist by putting in the effort and hours on practicing a violin. Putting efforts into practicing a clarinet first is not going to make you a better violin player. It's just going to delay the start of your violin training. If you're interested in inquiry, then that's what you should be doing. And doing something else first isn't going to prepare you for it or make you better at it once you start. Now, that's not to say that either I or Bhagavan is discouraging bhakti. If you have the inclination, do it. But don't ever let anybody tell you that you need to do any of these other practices, including bhakti, in order to get mature enough to start doing self-inquiry. Bhagavan, of course, encouraged bhakti, but you won't find him ever saying that it's necessary to do it in order to make oneself ready to do self-inquiry. Now, I picked out another question because it's on the same theme. Another person asked, Ashtavakra Gita states that good and bad are all the one self. So the question arises, can a robber or a murderer abide in the self, or is ethical purity of heart a precondition? Now here's a good one. Let's talk about Bhagavan and his attitude to morality in general before going on to discuss whether ethical purity is a necessary precursor to doing inquiry. I will say that Bhagavan expected devotees to behave themselves in a socially appropriate way. He expected them to be kind, considerate, not harm others, and so on. He wasn't prescriptive, but the way he responded to people who misbehaved makes it quite clear that he expected a certain level of moral rectitude in the people who lived with him. And if they weren't up to those standards, they could expect a ticking off. I think in the ashram books, there are many incidents where Bhagavan tells people off, for example, for behaving inappropriately to animals, to poor people who came to the ashram, and so on. I don't think he regarded good, virtuous behavior as a sine qua non for liberation, but he definitely expected it of devotees in his vicinity. And if it wasn't forthcoming, then he'd be the first person to tell them where they were going wrong. So what rules did he personally abide by and expect his devotees to follow? Again, he wasn't very prescriptive, so we can only get an answer to this by just looking at all the stories he was involved in where issues such as these came up. My opinion, I'll state it's only my opinion, is that he regarded the ashram as being a community of sadhus who were governed by sadhu dharma. So he would have, in his head at least, a set of rules on how the people around him should be behaving, and those rules were the kind of rules that sadhus in other places were conforming to. So I will support my thesis with some stories on this. There's the The well-known one when some robbers attacked the ashram in 1924. They broke in and one of them physically assaulted Bhagavan and hit him on his thigh. And this so incensed, I think it was Ramakrishna Swami, that he wanted to rush out with a big iron bar and chase the robbers down and attack them. Bhagavan stopped him and said, "We are sadhus, this is not the way that sadhus behave. The robbers have their dharma, they break in, they attack us, they try to steal. That's the dharma of robbers. Our dharma is to be sadhus. The appropriate way for sadhus to respond in these circumstances is to not react at all." There's another interesting story, lesser known than that one. I think sometime in the mid-1920s, there was some kind of fight, I will use the word fight, between Chinnaswamy and Dandapani Swami. I think they were almost coming to blows. They were very angry with each other. And Bhagavan watched, and when it looked as if it might be getting a bit physical, Bhagavan went up and intervened. There are various stories of what happened. The most extreme one is that Bhagavan actually hit Chinnaswamy with his stick to stop a physical fight breaking out. But he wasn't interested in the rights and wrongs of their argument. Chinnaswamy was wearing orange, Dandapani Swami was wearing orange. They were both living as sadhus in a sadhu ashram. And Bhagavan said, "I don't care what your argument is about. I'm not going to adjudicate on the rights and wrongs of your dispute. That's not what I'm here for. But both of you are wearing orange. Both of you are representing the sadhu community. If a physical fight breaks out here and now, and one of you kills the other, then that will give a bad reputation to sadhus everywhere. For the sake of sadhu dharma, you should desist and not get involved in disputes like this." So again, Bhagavan's overarching principle on this occasion wasn't that they got angry, they should be punished. It wasn't who's right and who's wrong. He was just framing the ashram as a community of sadhus who should adopt and sustain sadhu dharma in the eyes of the public, so that sadhus everywhere, so that people everywhere would have a good opinion of sadhus. I would just throw in a third story because it gives another indication of the sadhu dharma that Bhagavan was trying to uphold. He really, really did not like anybody in the ashram asking for money for the ashram or on his behalf. He wanted the ashram and its inhabitants to not beg, to wait for offerings to come, to say thank you if they came, but never take the initiative and ask anybody for anything. There's a couple of instances of rich people coming and being quite openly hustled for money. I would just narrate one of them. There was a visiting Maharaja who came to the ashram, and he actually complained to Bhagavan that he was miserable in his palace, that he had all the things that money could buy, and he was still unhappy. And he asked Bhagavan for blessings and grace. Bhagavan kept quiet and silently blessed him in the usual way. And then the Maharaj left. He walked out of the ashram, and then one of the devotees who thought, well, we shouldn't let this rich Maharaj escape without giving us some money. So he went after him and started giving a long list of all the things that the ashram needed, the things that weren't running properly because they were underfunded. News of this got back to Bhagavan, who was really, really angry. He said, "This man came here because money wasn't making him happy. He came here and he confessed to us that he wasn't satisfied with his life. He came to us, a bunch of begging, penniless sadhus asking for help. And what do? We chase him down the street and demand money. What is he going to think of us? This is not the way that sadhus should behave." So on innumerable instances, he got upset, he got angry, and forced the people around him to face up to the fact that they were living in a community of sadhus and that their behavior should conform to the behavior accepted by sadhu communities everywhere else. He hated waste, that's well known. He encouraged everyone around him to live frugally. This is an interesting story. he once said that Ishwara had made arrangements for there to be just enough for everybody in the world. That means, Bhagavan said, that if you take more than you need from the world, you are effectively depriving other people of scarce finite resources and simultaneously sinning against God, because it's Ishwara's dispensation that everyone should get just enough to get by on. The implication is that Ishwara could have made different rules when there was more than enough for everyone, but Bhagavan seemed to be saying that it's somehow a crime against God to take more than you need, because God's only given us a finite amount of things to get by on. So, having told all those stories, I think it's clear to see that there was a strong moral component in the way that Bhagavan himself lived his life, and that he also encouraged others to live in the same way. And if they didn't adhere to his rules of conduct, he could get quite annoyed with them. However, having said all that, I don't think he ever said that living this way was a necessary precondition for moksha. It's just something we should all do as a courtesy to all the other beings we share the planet with. So that's enough of that. Next. When listening to satsang, I listen to words with my ears. I pay attention with my mind. Am I not just reinforcing the habits of my ego? I would say yes, and my response to that is that that's why you shouldn't listen to the words of a guru with your ego. When you listen to the words of a jnani or read them in a book, do it with a quiet and empty mind. Excuse me. Don't let the words land in the disputative portion of your brain. Don't think about them, don't analyze them, don't categorize them. Allow the words to settle into you, allow them to settle into your consciousness, and allow them to reveal the truth of what those words are actually saying. If you do this with someone like Bhagavan, even reading his words, you don't have to hear them directly from his mouth. Read his words on the page. They will reveal to you exactly what the truth of those words are saying to you. So let me give you an example. When the Guru says to you, you are the self, you are consciousness, you are Brahman, don't collect the words with your mind. Don't think about what they mean. Don't decide this is not your experience. And don't then say, because this is not my experience, I have to do something to attain this experience. This is collecting the words and misusing them, I would say. You're not allowing the words to settle where the jnani is directing them. You're intercepting them with your mind, and you're trying to do something about them. That's often not what the words are for. You're putting up your mind as a barrier, which is stopping the self from revealing itself to you. You're trying to use the mind to reach the self without understanding that it is mind itself and its habits and its functioning that's preventing a true awareness of the self. There is a lovely story I want to tell. It will take some time, but I refuse to give this one up because it's so nice. Papaji told me this story, and it's about some old Marathi Swami of hundreds of years ago. And he was giving out oral instructions to his devotees in his ashram, and his devotees were writing them down and putting everything in a big pile in the room where these particular satsangs were taking place. So at the bottom of the heap were the first words the Guru had said, the next page up with the next day's teachings and so on. And there ended up, after some time, a big pile of papers. And the Guru somehow knew that everybody there was listening with their minds. They weren't absorbing the teachings, they weren't making the teachings their own reality. They were collecting information, and they were arranging it in a pile in their own minds, and in the physical world they were arranging them in a big pile in the study room of this ashram. So the Guru decided to point this out to them. So after they'd all left, he scattered the papers all over his room, and the next morning when they all assembled, he said, a big wind must have come in last night and disarranged all these papers. I'd like them put back in the order in which I gave out these teachings. You've all been sitting here every day You've all heard these teachings, you've written them down. It should be easy for you to arrange them in the correct order. Please start with day 1, put day 2 next, day 3, and so on. And the devotees, they hadn't really been absorbing what the teacher was saying. They were listening, as he said, they were scribbling it down, tossing everything on this big pile, and they couldn't do it. So one by one, all the people who had attended some or all of the talks were called in, and they all rather shamefacedly admitted that they couldn't remember enough of what the Guru had said to put all these papers in the right order, in the order of teachings that the Guru had given them out. Finally, the Guru said, well, there's only one person left, and that's the boy who looks after the cowshed. Bring him here, maybe he can help us. And everybody laughed because, first of all, the boy was illiterate. Everybody knew he couldn't read or write, so what use was he going to be? And secondly, more pertinently for the problem at hand, he hadn't sat in on any of the satsangs, he hadn't listened to any of the lectures. So the devotees pointed this out to the teacher, and he said, well, he's the only person left in the ashram. We have to be thorough. Call him anyway, bring him here, and let's see what he has to say. So the cowshed boy cleaned himself up, went to the Guru's presence, and the Guru said, I've been giving out these verbal teachings. My devotees have been writing them down, putting them in a big pile, but the pile is disarranged. I want them back in the right order. Can you help? And the boy from the cowshed said, well, I can't read or write, you all know that. But if I repeat the teachings, then you can find the appropriate bits of paper and you can stack them, start at the bottom and work your way up. So then he started orally, verbally giving out all the teachings that the Guru had been giving out in this room where he wasn't even present. And of course, all the devotees were amazed. They said, how can you possibly do this? You can't hear anything in the cowshed. You're too far away. And he said, I keep my ear permanently in the heart of my Guru. I don't need physical proximity. My ear is in the heart of the Guru. My heart is the Guru's heart. When the Guru says anything, it registers in my heart. I hear it in my heart as if I'm sitting here in this room. So Papaji told this story, a very nice, long-winded story. And the point of it is, when the Guru says something, when the Guru gives you instructions, don't say yes, yes, don't write it down, don't put it in a pile and turn it into a book. Have those words land into your heart, have those words reveal their true meaning to you, and have those words give you the experience of the self that the Guru is talking about when he says you are Brahman. Next. A couple of days ago, somebody emailed me saying, have you got any more Zoom meetings coming up? Can I listen in? So I inquired, and your Sangha had no objection if I gave out the link. And then I said, well, I already have a list of questions. You can't ask any questions. But then this person spontaneously sent the question and said, well, if you have time, please add this to your written list. I'd like to know the answer to this. And it was a question that I particularly liked, so I'm sorry to everybody else, but I'm promoting it up the list. And it says, from what you know in your own experience or from things that you've heard from others, is it possible for a devotee who does not live in Tiruvannamalai to receive darshan from Bhagavan in some way, even though he is no longer there? I think this is a question that might occur to a lot of people, so I will give my answer to this. But before I do, I will tell one story about Mudalia Patti. Mudalia Patti used to bring food to Bhagavan every day. And in her old age, she was virtually blind. She could barely see where she was going. And some days she couldn't even manage that. So she came into the dining room one day and accidentally put her foot in the middle of somebody's meal. Her foot just plopped in the middle of someone's rice and sambar. And Chinnaswami came up to her and said, Patti, you can't do this anymore. You can't see where you're going. You come here for Bhagavan's darshan, but you can't even see him anymore. You can't even see where your feet are going. You're putting your feet in other people's food. It's not necessary for you to come. like this, you can't see anymore. And she was outraged at this, and she said, I don't need to see Bhagavan to have darshan. Bhagavan sees me, and that's enough. If I present myself here in the dining room, Bhagavan is giving me darshan. Even if I'm completely blind, I'm getting his darshan. So she was saying this in a very loud and agitated way, and Bhagavan across the dining room heard her response and laughed and called out, she's absolutely right. Darshan isn't simply when the devotee sees the Guru is also giving darshan to the devotee. She gets darshan by coming here, whether she can see me or not. So I just throw that story in to clarify that darshan works both ways, that we don't need to see Bhagavan to get his darshan. All that really matters is that Bhagavan has to see us. Now, with that in mind, I want to read out some verses which I put into Padamalai about 15 years ago, and it's in a section entitled Bhagavan's Darshan. So Bhagavan asks the question, why do you pointlessly find fault with me, saying that I no longer look at you? You can take that question to be appropriate for people who never got the opportunity to look at him physically in real life. We can also lament the fact that we never got the opportunity, worry about the fact that we never managed to see him in person, and maybe we think that we're missing out in some way by not ever having seen him in person. Then the next verse says, if you would only fix your gaze upon me, you would know that, established in the heart, my gaze is ever fixed upon you. So this is back to the Mudaliapati story. Bhagavan is saying, you may not know it, you may be blind to where I am and what I am, but I am sitting in your heart, I am gazing at you, sitting in the heart, I'm looking at you. Don't blame me, don't find fault with me if you can't see me because you think I'm not there. I'm looking at you from inside the heart. I am always giving you darshan, whether you think you're being aware of it or not. When I put this in Padamalai, I put a little quote that Natananda recorded and put in Ramana Darshanam. And he has Bhagavan saying, Bhagavan is always bestowing grace. You yourself are always shining naturally as I. Does Bhagavan exist apart from that being consciousness? So what Bhagavan is saying is that I exist as your essence, as the I within your heart. If you want my darshan, don't be satisfied with a form that sits on the sofa, that walks around the ashram, that goes up and down the hill. That form will come and go. And even so, it's not the real form. The real Bhagavan is inside you as the I. It's in the heart. It's always there. And it's always giving darshan to you, even though you haven't got the interest or the capacity in looking in that direction. I am in your heart. I, Bhagavan, live there. This is my natural abiding place. And at all times, I am giving you darshan. So the final verse in this sequence says, looking at you from within the self, I never leave you. How can this fact be known to your externalized vision? So this is Bhagavan confirming the explanation I just gave. He is always there. He's always giving darshan. But if your vision is externalized, if you choose to look outwards, if you choose to be satisfied with a form that sat on a sofa, which walked on a hill, and which vanished, whatever, 70 years ago, then you're going to be disappointed that that form is no longer there, or that you never had an opportunity to commune with that form. But what Bhagavan would always say is, don't take me to be a body. If you take me to be a body, then you're going to be disappointed when that body disappears. Look at my true nature, look at my true self. And to do that, you have to take your externalized vision, you have to move it to 180 degrees. Instead of looking outwards, you look inwards, and you find me giving darshan non-stop in the heart all the time. So there's a nice little comment by Maragana, which I also put in Padamalai. I will just finish this question with that. And he said, God is perpetually bestowing his grace on all beings in the form of illumination that is shining unceasingly as I in the heart. It has therefore been said, how can the fault of not bestowing his sweet grace be attributed to God? So here Murugan is confirming that the self, that Bhagavan resides as I in the heart, that we all have the opportunity to have that darshan there. And whether we seek that darshan or not, darshan is being given to us from the heart, whether we know it or not. And he ends up by saying, unless they, the jivas, turn within in his direction and put attention on him, the truth that God is continuously bestowing his grace on them all the time will not be known to them. So all his life, Bhagavan said, don't take me to be the body, don't be satisfied with the form, because if you fall in love with the form, you'll be very upset when the form disappears. Look inside, find my true nature inside yourself, and if you do it, don't blame me for the fact that you're not receiving grace. I am there all the time, giving you darshan, bestowing your grace. Unless you tune your antenna, if you like, turn your receptive apparatus in that direction, you're not going to feel it or know it. And if you don't blame me, because I'm there all the time looking at you. Now the next question is, we know it is critical to understand the difference between knowing self and abiding in self. How do we experience an expansion of consciousness to bridge the gap between knowing and abiding? I want to take one portion of this because it's a clause which somehow to me indicates a kind of defective perspective. The last question I talked about defective perspectives, about looking for forms on a sofa. This is another defective perspective, and out of that wrong idea, the whole question arises. So central to the question is, how do we experience an expansion of consciousness? I want to talk about that. First of all, I will say that consciousness does not need to be expanded. Consciousness is as it is at all times. All that you need to do is to remove the idea that there is someone who thinks that consciousness is limited to a shape and form corresponding to the human body. Individual consciousness, the idea that you inhabit a body and function through a form, needs to be given up. You don't expand consciousness, you just give up a wrong idea of what it is. So think for a moment about what the word expansion implies. Expansion implies a kind of outwards inflation, a movement outwards, that somehow you in the center are getting a larger and larger, a more expansive field, until finally you reach, if not infinity, you're everywhere and everything, and that your consciousness has expanded to include the entire world. This is a wrong way of looking at things. If you do this, you are having a presumption that there is a central point, a coordinator, who is somehow registering this ever-expanding consciousness. This is the wrong way to look at consciousness. It's conceived that it can only be conceived as everywhere if there is a somewhere for it to appear to. Bhagavan once commented on this idea by saying to someone who asked about this consciousness being everywhere, he said it's not correct to say that consciousness is equally distributed everywhere. And then he paused for a few seconds before saying, no distribution, no everywhere. The last phrase was actually said in English. I don't know why he chose English for that. Bhagavan rarely replied to philosophical questions in English, but in this particular case, he used these four words, no distribution, no everywhere, to drive home the point that consciousness can't be explained or captured by any terms that imply it has a location or an extent. If you have an individual eye, then you project an exterior world that seems to exist outside you and to extend infinitely off into the distance. But when that individual eye goes, the notion that things are distributed in time and space vanishes along with that eye. the superstructure that the individual I creates and superimposes on reality, the idea that there are somehow separate objects out there perceived by a perceiver which interact in space over time. The whole of this superstructure evaporates, vanishes when the I that creates it all vanishes. So just as the dream world created by the dreamer I vanishes when one wakes up in the morning, when the waking state I is definitively ended by inquiry or surrender, the false world it created and superimposed on reality also vanishes. So what Bhagavan is saying is there isn't a manifestation that is somehow permanently existing in time and space. This is all your creation, all your projection. Get rid of the one who projects it, and you will understand that consciousness can't be expanded, doesn't have a perspective to which it appears. Remove the framework and you know consciousness as it really is. In Guru Vajrakovai and other texts, there's a term for consciousness that Bhagavan uses. It comes up quite a lot, and it's the Tamil word arivu. This is the equivalent of jnana or consciousness. For example, at the beginning of Who Am I, when Bhagavan is asked the first question, Nanya, who am I, by Siva Prakasan Pillai, he replied, Arivu Nan, consciousness, Arivu is I. So this Arivu is consciousness, it's jnana, it's pure, it's not located, it doesn't have an owner, it doesn't have a possessor, it's not something that's perceived. This is the consciousness that has no directions such as over here, over there. And when Bhagavan and Muruggana want to indicate this different kind of consciousness, the limiting kind of consciousness, which functions from inside a body, they add an extra word to Arivu, and the expanded term is Sutarivu. The Sutu added to Arivu means consciousness which is pointed out, indicated, shown. So when you as an individual I think that you occupy a position in time and space, you point to other times, other places, and you say, oh, back then, that's a temporal reference, or over there, that's a spatial reference. This is Sutarivu. This is pointing out from a particular perspective, something that's different, separate from that perspective, that seems to exist because you yourself have taken up residence inside a form, which then sees other forms which seem to be functioning through time. This localized position is embedded in the idea that you occupy a singular point, and that everything that is not you is distributed around you. And as an outgrowth of this perspective, you feel that the world moves slowly forwards in time, displaying images to you one by one, which you register and react to. You have to get rid of the idea that there is an I which thinks that it occupies a body and subsequently sees things nearby which are not I. When that limited body-bound I goes, something else goes along with it. The idea that there are things, objects distributed in space that interact with each other over time. When that happens, you can say truthfully from direct experience, consciousness alone exists. That's who and what I truly am. Nothing is separate from me, and all is included in myself. When Bhagavan realized the self in 1896, he wrote that as a result of inquiring who is the one who sees, the internally located seer inside him vanished, leaving pure consciousness. He says that which is always there was all that remained. From that moment on, his ability to see things as separate from himself or outside of himself definitively vanished. So when all is known to be consciousness, you've lost the pointing, discriminating mechanism, the Sutarivu, that declares, for example, this person over there is a good man, that one over there is a bad man. You stop discriminating, you stop distinguishing, you stop seeing things as different and separate from each other, and you stop making judgments about them. So when all is known as the self, when you've lost the pointing mechanism, when you've lost the reference point that points at other things and says, not me, when all is known as the self, you don't even activate the pointing, discriminating mechanism that declares this person is enlightened, that person is not. As Bhagavan once pointed out to Narayana, he said, there are no jnanis, jnana alone is. I love that statement. This for me is the essence of Bhagavan's experience. It's something that only a true jnani can say, and you can only say it from direct experience. When you know that consciousness alone exists, you don't even recognize that there might be some who are aware of that truth and others who are not, because the notion of others no longer exists. It's not anything that has any validity for you. So, sorry, I've got on my soapbox a bit here, a bit much. The original question was, how do we experience an expansion of consciousness to bridge the gap between knowing and abiding? So my answer to that, based on what I've just said, is that knowing self and abiding as self are essentially the same function. To have that knowing, that abiding, all you need to do is give up the idea that you occupy and function from one little corner of consciousness. How am I doing for time? Sorry.
You're doing perfectly okay, sir. We have enough time.
How much time have I used up?
You've used about 50 odd minutes so far.
Okay, so no problem. I will continue with the next one.
Sure.
This is a long question, and one reason I'm reading it out is because it's so long. The longness somehow is valid for the answer. So I'll read it out, and it says, while trying to pursue the inquiry, who am I, there appear to be two parts to this. One, the manas I, mind, the instinctive, immediate, wants to fulfill desires and gratify senses. Then there is the buddhi I, the intellect, calculative, considers pros and cons and makes decisions. Sometimes the two are in agreement, but often they fight vigorously. When manas I prevails, one feels guilty. When buddhi I wins, ego inflates. After the practice and reading of Bhagavan's teachings, a third observer I sometimes watches this fight. Often, observer I associates with buddhi, even when it's losing the war, as it feels it must not sit silent watching, manas I doing the wrong deeds. How can one transcend this fight and search for the real I? That was complicated. Well, first of all, I have to say that you're making life very complicated for yourself. If you want my advice, give up thinking about all these categories, all these varieties of I. As Bhagavan said on many occasions, there is only one I. This question in a different form came up in Maharshi's Gospel, where Maurice Friedman asked about it. It also came up in a question that Ganapati Muni asked Bhagavan. And on both occasions, Bhagavan replied that the I functionally is only one. It might perform different functions, or it might appear to take different forms, but its essence is single and unitary. Although Bhagavan might talk about these categories, these subdivisions of mind which come from the scriptures, he never advised devotees to think about the I in the way that this question is framed. Instead, he recommended simple attention to the I. Instead of deciding, well, it's got a manas component or a buddhi component or an observer witnessing component, he said, just give it simple attention. You don't find the source of I by thinking about it, by thinking about the way it functions, and by drawing up a classification. You eliminate it by steady attention until, starved of all the connections it's desperately trying to make to stay alive, it goes back to its source and it disappears. Reading this question somehow reminded me of a lovely comment that Nisargadatta made. And a visitor once asked him, what is the difference between you and me? And Maharaj replied, you fill your head with thoughts and then organize fights between them. I don't, that's the only difference between us. I like this. we put so much mental energy into maintaining the idea of an I who has to deal with other I's and other things that are perceived and classified as not I. All of this mental effort ends when the coordinating I is challenged to the point when it has to subside and vanish. When it goes, ideas about Manas I or Buddhi I will vanish along with it. There is only one I. If you choose to limit it or divide it up into functioning categories, you'll then end up locating it in a body, and then you'll get into endless mental dramas. You do what Maharaj was saying when he said, you fill your head with thoughts and you organize fights between them. Don't subdivide and classify the different forms and functions of I. Just hold a steady awareness of it until it subsides and disappears. That's a far more productive use of your time, in my opinion. I think Bhagavan would back me up on that. So the next question is, Bhagavan laid very little emphasis on the well-being of the physical body. Is that because energies awakened by spiritual endeavors ensure spontaneous healing? Or is it because the body will do it as whatever it's fated to do? Again, an interesting idea. Bhagavan recommended food and sleep in moderate quantities as aid to spiritual practice, but I don't think he ever specifically recommended them as aids to physical health. I think that you are right in saying that he didn't often go into great detail about how to stay healthy, although he did say on a few occasions that self-inquiry was good for one's health. He stressed the basics: eat moderate amounts of sattvic food, exercise to maintain reasonable fitness, but don't get obsessed in caring for the body. On other occasions, he spoke somewhat derisively of methods, exercises, even potions, the kaya kalpas that were supposed to prolong the life of the body. Bhagavan's focus was generally on excuse me, giving up the idea that one was limited to the body. It was not on prolonging the existence or sustaining its health. He did once say that diseases were like guests who visited you and took up residence in your body. He said if you put all your attention on these guests, they enjoy that attention, they feel welcome, and they decide to stay longer because they're getting such good attention from you. The implication from this is that if you ignore all these things, these diseases, these malfunctions, they might get bored and leave of their own accord. More generally, he said the body itself is a disease, that the constantly decaying and disintegrating body is a disease in itself, but the bigger and more deadly disease is the psychological one, the wrong notion that one is the body or that one functions from inside it. Once you cure that disease, it doesn't matter what happens to the body, it's done its job. I will just squeeze in one more question. I will overrun a little bit. And it's, can we be alive and awake after stopping the thinking process? How can one stop the thinking process which is needed to perform activities? I think Bhagavan would say it's not necessarily to stop thoughts or eliminate them. Bhagavan himself still had thoughts. In some of the ashram books, you can read him making comments such as, oh, I was just thinking about you when you walked into the hall. So definitely thoughts were floating around Bhagavan's head, but the difference between him and us is he didn't appropriate them. He didn't say, I am thinking these thoughts belong to me. What you have to get rid of is not thoughts themselves, but the idea, I am thinking these thoughts. It's the thinker of the thoughts that needs to be done away with, not the thoughts themselves. Once that happens, life will go on naturally, spontaneously. Thoughts may still be there, but you won't need to think or plan your life. You won't need a brain, you won't need a mind to live your life. In fact, it won't even be possible. Self will make you say the things that need to be said. Self will make you do the things that need to be done. And if thoughts are required, they will just appear at the right time and they will be dealt with. The sankalpas, the ideas I must do this, I must not do that, won't be there anymore. The chooser and the decider will be gone, but all the things that need to be accomplished will get done more efficiently and more effectively through the power of the self within you. There is an I am the body idea, a thought that compels you to think, to choose, to decide and plan. When this idea vanishes, you rest in what Bhagavan calls the natural state. He called that state Sahaja. There, in that one and only true state, everything happens spontaneously and naturally. Thoughts may still be there, but they won't bother you, and they won't compel you to make decisions or choose courses of actions through an intermediary I who claims ownership or occupancy of the body. Activities may go on, but you yourself will be still and silent in a state of undisturbable peace and inner silence. And on that optimistic point, I will end. Thank you very much for indulging me and listening to me. Namaste.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we have still more questions coming in to me through WhatsApp, but we will not take them right now. Maybe at a later point in time, whenever we organize the next satsang, we will pick them up. So thank you for that, and Namo Ramana sir. Jayanti Didi, may I just request you?
Yeah, I'll start. Taruna Runamani Kiranavali Nigartarumaksharamana Magarmalai Tere Nadia Tire Adia Tere Maral Telia Parabudal Porulaga Karuna Karamuni Ramanariyan Uvagaina Soliya Degatiyaga Arunachalamena அகமே அறிவோடும் ஆழ்வார் சிவனுலகாழ்வாரே அருணாச்சலவரற்கு ஏற்ற அக்ஷரமணமாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கரம் அருளே காப்பாயே அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சலமென அகமே நினைப்பவரகத்தை விரருபாய் அருணாச்சல அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகமும் நீயும் முற்று அபிநமாயிரு போம் அருணாச்சல அகம் புகுந்தி துன்னக குகை சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென் கொல் அருணாச்சல ஆறுக்காய் என்னை ஆண்டென்னை அகற்றிடில் அகிலம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சல பழித்த புனையே நினைப்பேத்தாயினி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சல ஈன்றிடுமன்னையின் பெரிதருள் புரிவோ எதுவோ உனதருள் அருணாச்சல உனையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் மேல் உறுதியாயிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சல ஓ சுற்றுளம் விடாதுனை கண்டடங்கிட உன்னழகை காட்டருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல என்னை அழித்தி போதெனை கலவாவிடில் எதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சல ஏன் இந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறரிழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சல ஐம்புல கழ்வர் அகத்தினில் போகும்போது அகத்தில் நீ இல்லையோ அருணாச்சல ஒருவன முன்னை ஒளித்தவர் வருவாரும் Jodi Hide Arunachala Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Omkara Porul Puyarilloi Unayaranivar Arunachala Avuvai Polenakon Arulai Tandenayaluvadul Kadan Arunachala Kannuக்கு கண்ணாய் கண்ணின்றி காண் உனை காணுவதெவர் பார் அருணாச்சலா காந்தம் இரும்பு போல் கவர்ந்தனை விடாமல் கலந்தென்னோடிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சலா கிரி உருவாகிய கிருபை கடலே கிருபை கூந்தருளுவாய் அருணாச்சலா கீழ்மேலெங்கும் கிளரொளி மணியல் கீழ்மையை பாஷை அருணாச்சலா குற்றமுற்றறுத்தனை குணமாய் பணி ஆள் குரு உருவாய் ஒளிரருணாச்சலா கூர்வாட்கண்ணிய கொடுமையில் படாதருள் குண்டனை சேர்ந்தருள் அருணாச்சலா கெஞ்சியோ அஞ்சியாய் கொஞ்சமும் இறங்கிலை அஞ்சலென்றே அருள் அருணாச்சலா கீழாதளிக்கும் முன் கேடில் புகழை கீடு செய்யாதருள் அருணாச்சலா கையினில் கனி உண்மை ரசம் கொள் உவகை வெறி கொளருள் அருணாச்சலா கொடியிட்டு அடியறை கொல் உன்னை கட்டி கொண்டெங்கன் வாழ்வேன் அருணாச்சலா கோபமில் குணத்தோய் குறியாய் என்னை கொள்ள குறை என் செய்தேன் அருணாச்சலா கௌதமர் போற்றும் கருணை மமலையே கடை தனி தாழ்வாய் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமண மாலை வாழி வாழ்க ஸ்வயம் பிரகாஷ வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சூதாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே ஏழுலகம் ஜீவன் முக்தி இன்பம் பொங்கவே ஏழுலகம் ஜீவன் முக்தி இன்பம் பொங்கவே இதயமாகும் இறைவனாகி எல்லாம் ஓங்கவே இதயமாகும் இறைவனாகி எல்லாம் ஓங்கவே பாழ்மனம் மகந்தை வாழ்வு பாழ்பட்டொழிகவே பாழ்மனம் மகந்தை வாழ்வு பாழ்பட்டொழிகவே பரம சச்சிதானந்தாத்மா பால் பொழிகவே பரம சச்சிதானந்தாத்மா பால் பொழிகவே வாழ்க ஸ்வயம் பிரகாஷ வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சூதாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே தட்டிலாத நித்ய ஜீவ தத்துவம் ஓங்கவே தட்டிலாத நித்ய ஜீவ தத்துவம் ஓங்கவே தன்மயத்தில் சின்மயம் தழைத்து ஓங்கவே தன்மயத்தில் சின்மயம் தழைத்து ஓங்கவே எட்டதிக்குமம் சசோகம் எதிரொலிக்கவே எட்டதிக்குமம் சசோகம் எதிரொலிக்கவே எல்லாம் பிரம்மம் என்னும் உண்மை வகிக்கவே எல்லாம் பிரம்மம் என்னும் உண்மை வகிக்கவே வாழ்க ஸ்வயம் பிரகாஷ வாழ்க வாழ்கவே சூழ்க சுதாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே சூழ்க சூழ்கவே சூழ்க சூழ்கவே வாழ்க வாழ்கவே நமோ ரமணா.
Thank you, Jayanti Didi. Thank you. Narayanji?
Yes, sir. Okay. ओम भूर्भुवस्सुः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। दीप्तमेव प्रसन्नामि अमृतस्वामी स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा ओम अपानाय स्वाहा ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा ओम भूतानाय ओम समानाय स्वाहा ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। घोषीरं कदलीफलनिवेद्यं समर्पयामि। मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि। अमृतोत्तरपुत्रं समर्पयामि। नीराजनं समर्पयामि। नीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि। हरि ओम हरि ओम। धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। दीपार्थं समर्पयामि। पूर्णिमा समाहितं नागवल्ली तलयोर्धं कर्पूर्ण सोमरसं प्रतिकृतां कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। गोवा एतस्य राजमानस्य यो राजा सन् राज्यो वा सौम्येने यदे देवस्वामेधानि अवधि भवन्ति वेदावन्तो वै देवानां स्वाहा स एवास्मन् स्वार्थकैतन्ति स एनं पुरस्सवन्ते राज्याय देवराजा भवति तत्र दूर्यो पादचन्द्रदागं हेमा विद्युतो पादिकुलो हेमेतनि समयमानि मनवादि सर्वं तस्य माता सर्वं विदं विवादि कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। ओम राजाधिराजाय प्रत्यतायिने नमोऽयं पवित्राय पुण्ये नमे रामाय रामाय कामे नमो सदालु राय वैष्णवाय महाराजाय नमः। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। बुद्ध करते हरि ओम हरि ओम। ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। लोभापुष्पं वेद पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् वसवान् भवति तन्त्रमा पापान् पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् वसवान् भवति ओम तदात्मा ओम तत्सत्यम ओम तत्सर्वं ओम तत्पुरोर्नमः। अंतर्चर्ति भूतेषु गुहायां विश्वमूर्तिषु त्वं यज्ञस्थं वसत्कारस्थं इन्द्रस्थं रुद्रस्थं विष्णुस्थं ब्रह्मस्थं ओम तदा वदोतुसो अमृतं पुरस्सरं न कर्मणा न प्रजयादने नित्यानैके अमृततुमानसु परेण नाहं निहितं उपायं विप्राणते दत्तदेयो विसन्ति वेदांग विज्ञानते नित्यदाता संन्यास योगात वे शुद्ध सत्वा ते ब्रह्मलोके तु परांतकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ते सर्वे तारं विभावं परमेश्वरभूतं यत् पुण्डरीकं गुणमत्य सर्वं सदं तत्रावित्तकर्म कगनं विसोग तस्मिन् यदन्तं तद्वादित्यं यो वेदादौ स्वर प्रोक्तो वेदान्तस्य प्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परसमहेश्वर पुष्पं श्री रमण महर्षि समर्पयामि। ओम तत्सत् ब्रह्मार्पणमस्तु। हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम। भावानि जन्मांतर पितानि च राजानि प्रकृति पदे अरुणाचल रमणाय शमनाय ओम नमो भगवते शमनाय ओम नमो भगवते ओम नमो भगवते शरणाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय वेदांत रूपं सुखो
Thank you everyone for joining. This brings us to a closure of the Sunday Satsang with Mr. David Godman. We look forward to reconvening in the second week of April. Thank you. Namo Ramana.
No more.